I think it's because we're so hugely embedded to keep like emotions don't belong at work. We have to keep our emotions at the door. We've learned as a society to view emotions as not important, but that's the human experience.
Welcome to Safe Space Made Simple, a practical podcast that guides clinical leaders and healthcare managers to create trust and support with their teams. I'm your host, Trace Hobson. Join me for weekly interviews, practical tools, and inspiring transformational stories of bringing people together in healthcare. Now, let's dive in. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Safe Space Made Simple. Today, I have the privilege of sharing a conversation and interview that I had with my friend and colleague, Carrie Lamb. Carrie is an Indigenous human resources professional, a facilitator, a motivational speaker, and a coach who's doing incredible work in our world today in Canadian organizations and helping teams and leaders to create sacred workplaces where we have a different kind of experience than we've had in some of the colonized systems that all of us have been impacted by. Carrie's very special to me because when we met 2 years ago through our relationship and conversations and my sharing with her some of my own angst with my own cultural identity, Carrie invited me generously into a leadership program that helped me in my healing journey with integrating a two-eyed seeing and way of being for my work and for my life. I was struggling with integrating the white facing side of me with an English background and the indigenous side of me that goes back generations after generations. And Carrie's work helped me profoundly to be able to take another few steps in integrating and living out in integrity those two parts of me. Our conversation covers a wide range of topics from decolonizing systems to being trauma informed to creating sacred workplaces where the human spirit is nourished and a new way of working can emerge. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, let's go right to the show. So, Carrie, I'm so grateful to have you here to share your work with the people that are listening to this podcast. To start off with, and to start in a good way, can you share who you are and what the work is that you're doing in the world that's really giving you joy?
Mhm. My name is Carrie Lamb. My traditional name is Natani Hoshi Sekwi. It means eagle whistle woman, and the way that that name came to me was with the understanding that I'm the voice of my people. So I carry a lot of responsibility and joy just in that particular name. And the way that shows up in the world and the work that I do is I'm a public speaker, I'm a coach, I'm a workshop facilitator, and anything HR I completely am wholeheartedly in love with. And I love it because HR um, is the where people provide for their families. It's where they give their whole hearts, like everything that they want to give to the world, they're able to do that in a really sacred way. And I like decolonizing and dismantling colonial structures that perpetuate inequality and harm to all peoples, not just Indigenous people. But I always speak from my own lens. I am an Indigenous person, and I try to speak from my own voice, which is the only voice that I can speak from. I can't speak from yours. I can't speak from anybody else's. I could just speak from mine. And I try to integrate Indigenous knowledge and values and practices into a lot of these systems where um, I get told people experience HR as an oppressive system.
Mm.
It's another way to try to create and box people into showing up at work to make other people feel comfortable. Because if you shake up the system, then everyone's uncomfortable going, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on here because we're not doing things the ways we've always done. And that's a lot of the work that I do is really just going into ceremony with myself and really understanding how people experiencing employment in the here and now, and
Hmm.
how can we discover of what it can look like in the future. And
Mm.
that is my way on cultivating a space that's safer for the seven generations that are going to follow me.
Mm. There's a lot to unpack there. So the first thing I'm curious about, maybe a list of two or three, I noticed that you have launched a new brand, and it's called Sacred Workplaces, if I remember right. And what is a sacred workplace to you? And tell us a little bit about where that branding comes from.
Mhm. I was sitting with my elder Emily Henry, and we were talking about how sacred the workplace is. And that, again, as I was explaining previously, I was talking about that when people show up to work, they're trying to give their best. They have this really sacred bundle of knowledge that they've acquired throughout their career. And they're coming to employment, opening up this sacred bundle for the employer
Mm.
to experience and to contribute and to be excited about the work they do. And I called it sacred workplaces, just knowing that people are doing that. So that again, that's my way of knowing, opening up their bundle and giving this sacred experience to their employer. And I called it sacred workplaces because with the intentionality of sacred being there, because people forget how sacred people are, what the experiences they're trying to contribute. And I think that's a lot of why they experience harm, they
Mhm.
experience hurt when they're in their employment experience, is because um, the colonized system or systems as a whole don't acknowledge how sacred it is that people are showing up into their spaces,
Mhm.
willing and geared to give them their best. And I think it's important that we use that word sacred in spaces so we can, with the intentionality of knowing that we have to care for people in that way, in a sacred way. So when they
Mhm.
come forward to us and to our employment experiences or into our as employers, then we have to know that they're giving us something sacred. So we have to try to deliver an experience that feels a little bit more sacred to them to know. And
Mhm.
I think of that in spaces of psychological safety, cultural safety, um, paying people well. I I'm a big advocate on paying elders in a competitive way, and we don't do that. And the systems often are looking for cost saving.
Mm.
And I'll be a little bit more political, even in the healthcare system. Um, we see that people it's a unionized environment, and people are striking because they don't feel that they're paid well or they're recognized in a good way for the sacredness that they bring to the table day in, day out in healthcare. Our frontline staff are giving their heart and soul, but then the reciprocity and the sacredness of that reciprocity isn't experienced and delivered back. We
Mm.
don't care for them in big ways. And
So
I thought the system was going to change when I saw COVID happen. Remember when we are going out and there's a day of the week we're going out and banging our pots and pans
yeah,
and cheering
yeah.
for our frontline staff? Why don't we do that every day? Why didn't we learn something from that and
Mhm.
celebrate those that put their heart and soul in a sacred way? And that's why I called it sacred workplaces, is because
Mm.
we forget how sacred that relationship is.
Yeah, it's a beautiful name. I think it communicates a lot, and I love the image that you have too of the flames as well. It's very energetically attractive, and I think that that's really good. So when I listen to you talk about a sacred space, a sacred workplace, one of the things you mentioned was a psychologically healthy and safe space in those times. And I wonder, when you look at what's going on in a sector like healthcare, where there's many that don't feel safe, and you're going into that place and you're generating a safe space for yourself and with people, how are you actually doing that, especially in a big system that may not feel safe for a lot of people? How are you generating that when you go and do your work?
Mm. So we can't move towards actioning change unless we speak our truth. So one of the things that I really did was in my previous role was really listened to the experience of Indigenous talent, and then I understood the sacredness of what they were sharing with me. It was very vulnerable. It was very raw, and then I listen to my inner wisdom. And so for me, when I go into the work, it's not just about like going to my computer and tapping it through a bunch of documents and things like that. For me, it's much deeper. Actually go into a bit of a ceremony with myself. So I smudge all of my equipment. I go into a space, and then I draw upon my wisdom. What is the wisdom that's coming forward for me in this moment? And I think about it, and then in my mind's eye, all of a sudden something will land and my spirit is called to do something. And I'll hear what the truth was. And then I'll try to pair with my Indigenous knowledge, the wisdom that I carry in my sacred HR bundle. And I'll try to execute, or I don't like that word, but I try to deliver a solution that speaks to that truth that they'd shared with me. So there was an idea that I had to have a space called the Restore program where um, no matter whether we have evidence as HR professionals that someone was harmed in the workplace, that they have the opportunity to go into a space of healing.
Mm,
They still felt hurt. So that particular concept came from that sacredness of going into ceremony with myself, really listening to what people were feeling in employment and trying to deliver something that felt true to their truth, and also
mhm,
feeling my own pain in that too, like how I carried that pain when I felt something like that, and really look at things from the whole person of what they were needing to impact to restore balance in the way that they were experiencing employment, looking at the mindful self, the bodily self, the spiritual self, and how I could support that in a somatic way. And
mm,
that's why I love somatic teachings. It's so akin to the way that I believe that healing work happens. Is just really going to a space of grounding and rooting respect, compassion, interconnectedness, aligning with that, my Indigenous ways of knowing, and then my HR teachings and breathing forth programs that hopefully help people feel safe.
mm. You know, as I listen to you talk, and you were talking, at the beginning about having work that is decolonizing um, different organizations or sectors or places of work. And the way you're describing it, for me, it is a very different approach. It would almost be the antithesis of what we're told to do, like investigative practice in HR, in respectful workplace practice, typically speaking. It's all about, is it founded? Is it unfounded? Is it vexatious? What's the investigative process? But when I hear you talk, you're talking about something very restorative and humanizing. It's not that we don't want to get to what happened, but it's a very different intention. And so it makes me wonder, what would you say to the leaders that are maybe listening to this and going, yeah, but what about the, investigative process, or what about the costs or operational impacts or all that stuff? Like, what could you say to them that would help communicate sort of the spirit of your way of working, which is a very ancient wisdom, indigenous approach?
I think that when I look at that, then I try to practice a lot of humility and see people where they're at. And so for me, I understand the resistance to wanting to enter into a more sacred space in the way that we practice HR or how we support people. But to those particular leaders, it's usually because the culinary systems really like things like return on investment. They can tend to be very capitalistic, and there's a lot of power dynamics at play in culinary systems. And um, I'm always really curious, so I'll ask questions to inquire to see where they're at. making sure that I foster a conversation where they feel respected and valued, and that their thoughts are important too. Um, but for those leaders that don't really see the value of practicing those things, I think it's because we're so hugely embedded to keep like emotions don't belong at work.
Yeah.
um, we have to keep our emotions at the door. Um, it's not safe to talk about spirituality in the workplace because people will feel things. And so I feel like it's like the workplaces, so a lot of leaders that I end up supporting that way, um, it's a shift from thinking that we are devoid of emotion and that we're
Mm.
here to do a job and we're here to like almost like a robotic approach. We come in, we do our job, we go home. We come in, we do our job, we go home. And that like perpetuating that pathway, we've learned as a society to view emotions as not important, but that's the human experience. And so when I do my inquiries, I just really look at I see them where they're at, and I try to like really use my intuitive nature to kind of understand where they are. And
Mhm.
most times, I'm able to really house a conversation that is healthy. Um, I've in my time, I'm thinking of one leader in particular, a big barreling uh, man, and he was he was sharing with me that in his profession we don't talk about trauma,
Mm.
and it's never discussed. We just come in, we do our job. I don't understand the value of talking about trauma in this space. It's not relevant. I went, oh, okay. um, what do you do for a living, sir? And he said, I'm a policeman. I'm like, okay, sure. Great. Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. Tell me a little about the work that you do and what you've been exposed to. And as he's sharing in our conversation, then trauma was very present in his experience. He had been a policeman for, I think it was 35 years, and but had never talked about trauma.
Mm.
And I asked him what that felt like, and he said it felt like, and he started to tear up, and he said it felt like um, his experiences weren't valid, that he had to just like plug away, move forward, and then this particular experience that caused him harm, spiritual harm, and
Mhm.
emotional harm, and bodily harm, that it wasn't valid, it wasn't important because the system told him it wasn't. So to those particular leaders, I always enter into the conversations with curiosity because someone had told them at one time that their emotions weren't valid. And I have to try to discover through curiosity where that unmet need was.
Mm.
Someone decided that they weren't important enough to feel. And they then created this barrier. Not a barrier, but a block, a
Right.
protective block, to make sure they were never hurt in that way. So we undress that in curiosity to figure out where it is that their unmet needs weren't met, and they go to a space of healing and understanding, and then I usually am able to bring them into an experience where they know it, because you can't recognize it until you feel it. And that is what a lot of my conversations is bringing people to the feeling.
Mhm.
I can recognize the feeling. Now I can have the conversation on why it's important for me to care for the people that I lead, why it's important for me to um, be vulnerable when I'm struggling. In our ways, if someone is tired, like we really decolonize things like time, and if someone is saying, oh, I had a really hard time yesterday, I was like doing my healing work and I'm just feeling exhausted today. And before colonization, like it probably would have, the conversation would have been, oh, just go have a rest, I can see that you're really struggling. But in
Mm.
these colonized systems, we're not told that. It's like brush yourself off and go do your thing. In a
You know,
long-winded way, I hope I answered that.
no, I think it's a great answer. And as you're talking, it just makes me think about all the different ways that when we stuff that feeling down, it sort of reverts back to where those original fragmented times, when you experience trauma in your life or at work, whether it's primary or vicarious or secondary, and you don't actually allow space to feel that feeling because you're not safe or because it's not the right time, and then you stuff it and you don't do anything with it, that has so many really powerfully negative consequences in your life over time. And it makes me think, when you think about like a big sector like healthcare, how much distress is just ignored or glossed over, and that emotion is just stuffed down. And to me, in the work that I do, I think that that's the source code for what we need to pay attention to actually transform healthcare. If we don't do that, nothing is ever going to change, because we're going to keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Meanwhile, absenteeism keeps going up, retention keeps going down. People are leaving healthcare like never before. And there's lots of like operational reasons for that. And I know that's true, but I actually think that it's more related to what you're sharing about. And if we were to slow down and create sacred spaces where we can experience those feelings and really honor them and witness ourselves and others go through them, that energy can then fill our sails, can actually propel us forward, I believe. So I love what you're
Mm,
sharing.
mhm. And when people like, so that last point that I made, when people feel rested and well, then you can really see the difference of what they're able to provide you as employer. So, for example, on Monday, like I had some time to rest, and Monday, I really felt that space of creativity, that the creative thought, that next, like above and beyond thinking that I love about myself. And then when people are well and rested, then you see more of that start to transpire, and you see more of people rising to great thoughts, like above and beyond solutions. And I think that that's really important for, like, when we start at healing, people then can feel well, and they can contribute to their employers' visions and missions, and things they're wanting to accomplish in a good way.
Mm. Hey, everybody, we're just going to take a quick break so that I can tell you a little bit about a resource that I created for you that's free of charge, that helps you to be able to generate a safe space if you're working as a leader or a manager or an executive in healthcare. You know as well as I do that is so many challenges that it's sometimes difficult to know how to operationalize things like psychological health and safety or well-being, especially when you have barely enough time to breathe, let alone do that. How do I do this? Well, I decided to create the Tiny Steps Safe Space Challenge, which is a one-on-one coaching challenge that's done during lunch hour, where you can come, and it's just for one person at a time. So the space is very limited, but I'm going to guide individuals through 5 different sessions that will teach them exactly how to generate a safe space in circumstances where that feels really difficult. On day one, we'll cover how to generate a safe space in complex clinical cultures. On day two, how to generate a safe space with teams on the floor. Day three will be 3-step systemic coaching that makes a difference, that actually sticks. Day four will be being congruent to reduce burnout for you and your team. And day five is succession that fills roles and shifts and progresses your career. So this will be done in a very different way. This is not an educational or didactic experience. It's a somatic and systemic coaching experience using a modality of coaching that I call safe space systemic coaching. If you'd like to experience this, this is a very limited offer that I'll be doing for a select few people. So it'll be first come, first serve. Click on the link and check out the webpage that I created for this so that you can get any of your questions answered, or that you can get some more information. Now, without further ado, let's get back to the show. Carrie, I'd like to shift gears a little bit and hear a little bit about the program that I know that you were part of creating, that I had the honor of being a part of, which is the Fire Within. And if you could share a little bit about that program, where it came from, and I'm hoping that maybe you'll offer that in the future again. But I loved this program, and I think that it would be great for people to hear about that program.
Mhm. Where it came from, and again, like the truth space. So the truth is that at that time where I was working, the number of Indigenous employees was in leadership seats was 18, and the organization is 40,000 plus people. And I thought, out of all of those people, there's only 18 Indigenous people that are in leadership seats. And it really hurt. And I sat with that hurt. And I'm like, why does this hurt? This hurts because that means that decisions are being made in healthcare without us. And a large portion of the people, like mental health and substance use, um, that are a lot of the large part of the population that are being served are Indigenous people in those spaces where there's a lot of hurt that's being experienced. And it really bothered me that in the system, there's not enough Indigenous voices making important decisions. And these are our lands. You know, I'm a visitor here to the Stalo territory, but these are our lands. And decisions are made on behalf of us every single day without us. And that really bothered me. So I really went with the intentful focus to try to cultivate a space that was more of a holistic approach. And I shared this idea with a lady that was working there at the time, and she was really excited. She started thinking about like the inherent strengths and resilience and brilliance of Indigenous leaders that they're able to contribute to the healthcare system. And she was like, oh, how can I help to empower Indigenous voices in this way? Like, I will do anything. And so I shared what the truth was. This is the truth. There's only 18. That means the system's not safe, or we're not providing opportunities to grow Indigenous leaders that feel safe. So creating the fire within was really I wanted it to be culturally meaningful, knowing that we started off with the concept knowing that as Indigenous people, our identity, our like who we were as humans to exist, was the thing that was attacked by systemic racism, by colonialism, and all those types of things that we speak about a lot. And so I needed to start there. So we started creating the first few days where it really started to try to restore a bit of a balance of participants understanding aspects of themselves and how they intersect their professional and personal lives as well as their cultural ways. And I understood that many of them, might have been the first time for them to experience their cultural ways because colonialism also removed pathways for us to experience ceremony, pathways for us to be connected to our communities. All of those things, there's a massive disconnect for many of us. So I knew that people were going to be experiencing this for the first time. And as they're addressing and understanding who they were and claiming their Indigenous identity, I knew that trauma was going to come up as well. So in that space, I brought through a trauma worker that was able to hold the space, knowing that it might show up. And then when the two current non-Indigenous supporters for the program came forward, then there's a lot of fear. Oh my gosh, people are going to feel trauma. I don't want to traumatize people. I'm like, no, it's just going to be in the room. There is so much hurt that we've experienced because of these systems that it's naturally going to arise. It's a fact. We know it's going to be there. So let's make sure we have someone there that's specifically there for the space of holding a healing opportunity should trauma arise. And it was really quite beautiful. And then the vision was, well, I need to be able to create a pathway for people where they start to curate their plan and what they're going to do with their career. In our Indigenous ways of knowing, knowledge is transferred over. And so I thought, how can I do that in a way that where knowledge is transferred over? And so I knew an elder was going to have to support. So I again went into that space of ceremonial understanding, ancestral knowledge coming through and around me. And then an elder that I know Elder Emily Henry came to my mind's eye. I'm like, she would be amazing in this space. And so I knew she would be able to support both the pathway of creating a professional development plan in a way that we would have transferred knowledge, got excited about the gifts that we bring. And what I really loved about that particular space when it happened live was it was exactly as my vision was, where we were claiming our talents, we were claiming them. So not only were participants doing a professional development plan for themselves, they're also claiming their gifts. So when they said, "Oh, I'm really good at working with people," then the elder would say, "Say it again. Say it one more time. I'm really good at working with people," and the voice would be small and a little bit shaken. She'd go, "I'd like to say, I want to hear you say it one more time." And then the person's spirit would rise and go, "I really like working with people." Like, it was intentionally so. So then you can claim it with all of your spirit, the gifts that each participant carried. And that was a lot of my vision when I went into the ceremony of trying to create the program. The end of it was like, I really wanted people to start to understand how to advocate for themselves. I didn't want to open them up and think that it was going to be a utopic experience after they were done the leadership program. We're still going into a very violent system that
Mhm.
really does not want Indigenous voices there. They just it bucks. So I knew that they were going to experience things like that. So the final days were about gaining self advocacy tools. Um, how do I navigate when someone is hurting my feelings about my Indigenous identity when I go back out, when I don't have this space of safety? And I try to do it in that way, and even with the intentionality of having an actual ceremony as the graduation, um, because I knew that many people in the room had an experience ceremony before, and I needed them to feel what that felt. Because again, we're bringing people to how it feels. We can't just tell them in words; they'll feel it. And so when even the graduation, the intention was also so then they would be immersed in this experience that was rich, huge, and wholly healing.
Mm.
And it was big. And not one person in that graduation ceremony had a dry eye because they were able to bear witness to their own individual growths. Even myself, seeing my vision come into light, and it was in real life, everything that I had witnessed and visioned in my mind's eye into my ceremony, trying to cultivate that program was exactly how it was meant to be. It wasn't perfect. We made mistakes, but those mistakes were for our learning and growth. And everything happened the way it should have happened. And I felt a lot of joy in creating that space.
Mm. Well, I can tell you that it was an incredibly healing space for me, and it makes me also wonder about the possibility or potential of sharing that work with other health authorities or all of the health authorities in British Columbia. I don't know if you have that intention, but I think it would be a beautiful offering, which makes me wonder. So, you know, maybe respond to that if you can, and then what other work do you have going on right now that you're really excited about?
I do similar things to creating the fire within in my workshop facilitation work. So it's a lot of like self-advocacy tools and things like that. So I do two things. I support Indigenous folks, or I support HR folks to try to understand how they could reposition the way that HR is experienced and reimagine how it's experienced. So I do workshops with them. And again, like it's with the intent that they feel the impact of what they're wanting to see as a change. And then I also have I call it a menu these days because I can't think of a different word, but I have a menu of workshops that I deliver to Indigenous ERGs, which is employee resource groups in lots of different organizations on topics like navigating Indigenous identity in the workplace. Um, um, we talk about one particular one is about our sacred boundaries. Because as Indigenous people, a lot of our boundaries were infringed upon by these systems, and we weren't allowed to say no. So um, we were um, we were unfortunately then taught that our no didn't mean something, or our boundaries didn't mean something. So that particular workshop is restoring the importance of being able to say no and the sacredness of that word, and that people can't, like, if it doesn't serve your spirit or doesn't heighten your spirit or get your spirit excited, that you can have boundaries, and those boundaries are okay, they're sacred. And when we use again that word sacred, then it allows for people to understand that, at this time I can't do this work with you, or at this time you're hurting my feelings. Like, understanding how to navigate the complexity of those conversations. I
Mhm.
also do some work in the spirit of, like, um, a lot of people, a lot of Indigenous folks, um, they don't know what to do with the experience of racism. And so some of my work, well, a good portion of my workshops are just being able to recognize what a microaggression is. And
Mm.
again, like, going into that space of claiming what that looks like. When you can claim it, name it, then you can heal it. Is kind of how I see it. So that particular workshop really helps to support people to know what that looks like. And then again, it's felt. So give, I share a lot of stories. So and so shared this experience with me, and it was a microaggression, and this is why. And I use storytelling as a modality for people to feel and, like,
Mhm.
go, wait a minute. When Joe told me that he wanted me to speak and do a land acknowledgement, and that's it, and I was the only Indigenous person, that really hurt. Now I understand why. He wasn't
Mhm.
asking anyone else to do it. How come just me? And then, like, undressing why that hurts. And then we, in a very, like, coaching approach, we discuss it. We go into different ways of supporting how they're gonna overcome when they experience a microaggression in their own way. The other thing that's important is um, leaving people in wellness. So all of my workshops um, they can be really heavy. The topics can be really heavy, and I never not leave people in wellness. So I do, like, different mindfulness practices, or we do different kind of activities just to really ground that energy. So then
Mhm.
people aren't going home with that weighted um, feeling on themselves after experiencing something I taught them, or brought them to. Um, I want them to know and have tools and how to navigate themselves back to wellness when they're regulating their emotion. They're not left with this hurt.
That is amazing, amazing work. So, what is the easiest way for people to get in touch with you to talk to you about the work that you do and invite you in to do some work with them?
LinkedIn tends to be the area that people always reach out to me, is where I'm most present as a professional, and it's where I give a lot of my wisdom very freely and openly,
Mm.
whether it's in my truth, whether it's in my brilliance, whatever it is. I try to deliver a lot of my thoughts and teachings on LinkedIn, and then they can connect with me by direct messaging me.
That's great. So we'll put that into the show notes for this show, and just feeling really honored and grateful to have you here. Thank you for sharing so generously the work that you're doing, and thank you so much for the work that you are doing in places where it's really needed.
Must reach out. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for watching this show, for listening to this show. Carrie can be reached on LinkedIn, and you can find her contact information in the show notes below. And remember, just even if you were impacted by what she shared, reach out to her on LinkedIn and send her a direct message. I know she would love to hear from you. Your time with us and to for listening to this show. Really appreciate your support. And remember, when you leave here and you get to your workplace and you're doing your job, remember to be a safe space. Thank you again for getting to the end of this podcast. And if you enjoyed this and you found that there was value in it for you, my invitation is for you to subscribe for future episodes that come out weekly on Tuesdays. Thank you again, and I'm looking forward to being with you next time. Now remember to be a safe space.